that's what you spent a lot of your time doing, thinking about, researching, studying. Just really interested to get your take on how you think about teams.
Yeah. So teams in general, for me, what's really interesting about it is that I think most of what we grow up with when we think about teams is in sports, right? And then as you kind of get into your career, most of what you start seeing team as is the immediate team that you're working with. And for me, I like to go a little bit more broader. A team for me is any group of people sharing a mission,
Mm.
a way in which they connect, a way in which they collaborate together. So it can essentially be people that you are working in community with. It could be your sister or your brother. It could be your significant other or your partner. It could be your kids. It could be siblings, cousins. It transcends, I think, this notion of just very finite spaces where there's scores to be kept, right? I love the notion of teams being not just about the scores. Those are really like the outcomes that happen when you focus on the connection, the collaboration, the curiosity you have with each other and helping each other win. And that can be in any medium.
Yeah.
So,
What do you think the benefit is of thinking about teams in that way versus, what you
yeah.
were saying previously?
Yeah, I think it frees you from, maybe this scoreboard anxiety. And it allows for you to really be in engagement with the people that you are working on that thing with,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you've seen founders, you're a founder,
Yeah.
right? I've founded a nonprofit before as well. And I think there's many ways in which success can be defined. You got your next funding, you got your next round, you signed your next client.
Hmm.
Okay, great. You scored the goal,
Yeah.
right? You did all of those things, but I think like the assist, right? The person that's making sure all the water is good to go for the athletes that are on the court. Those are equal parts members of the team that might not have an official position on the roster. So I think it frees you up from thinking about just a finite group, but it opens up that any member is a contributor to the success. I always like to say, there's nobody that's really self-made. We're all a product of people that have poured into us,
Hmm.
whether it's encouragement, whether it's feedback, whether it's very hard conversations, or even just saying, I see you. I see what you're doing. That's pretty cool. So I think it really frees us up to see people in a different light and allows for them to show up authentically as well.
Invisible change. Now, you mentioned this to me when we were chatting,
Yes.
and I was like, what's invisible change, Brian?
Yes.
So I guess we could start there.
Yes.
Can you just explain what invisible change is?
Of course. Most people think of change as the things that happen to them or the things that they start doing after stop doing something else. So as an event. And that's really what change is. And this is a framework that goes back to the 80s and 90s from an American named William Bridge. And he drew a distinction between change, which is the external event that largely happens to us. I leave job one, I start job two. And then the transition between those two changes, which is my internal, emotional, psychological, mental reorientation from job one to job two. And his distinction was pretty important because most of us think that change occurs, and for most of us, change actually happens to us in the business sense. The company says, we're going in this direction, and then they say, nope, we're going in that direction. And so it's actually inflicted on us. And when it's done very badly, it's a pretty painful infliction. But the distinction between the two is really, really important for leaders and for managers who really want to understand how to help their teams, help their companies evolve and move through these different phases. So change is one thing, transition is the other thing. Change is visible, external, an event. Transition is internal and it's completely invisible. It's emotional and it's usually overlooked in most companies.
So are you saying is kind of the expectation you have as what's going to happen is the internal, and external is what is actually happening to you?
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. The internal is a sense of really, the worst case, it's a sense of loss. And if you think of something that you've done in your life, a new skill you've picked up or a new hobby, you start from a position of relative ignorance. I want to learn how to play golf. and I don't know anything about golf, and I've seen it on television, and so I go and I try. And what you have to do in order to step into learning something new or being in a new situation is, stop doing the things that you didn't do. So in a sense, I'm losing the old habit that I had. I'm losing this sense of identity and skill that I had. And in the business world, it's in a company setting, especially in startups, in high growth companies and high change companies, it's really, really significant to take an early stage group of people and have them running as fast as they can in a particular direction, and then say, whoa, wait a second, we have to pivot. And pivot is such a benign word, and it makes it sound pretty innocent. And yet all of those people have invested so much of their identity, so much of this transitional ingredient, if you will, into doing what they were doing really well. And now the company says, the founder says, oh, no, go this way. And some teams can absorb that successfully. Most teams can't. And certainly over time, all of these different changes mount up, and companies will focus on change A, B, C, D, E. They won't focus on the transitions in between all of those. So all of a sudden you go down the road, a couple of years, you've got 6 changes, you've got 6 transitions that have been largely ignored, but all of that instability is there. It's present in the team dynamics. It's present in the company that's gone from 10 people to 75 people. And this is really where most founders just don't understand that what they're doing right now has significant and real consequences to when they grow. So a lot of founders will tell me, oh no, we'll get to the HR stuff, we'll get to the org stuff, we'll get to the culture stuff later. Well, later is actually right now. You're dealing with the future from a team perspective and from an interpersonal perspective. Right now is the future.
What startups and high growth companies can do to set their business and TA teams up for success with technology, and how you're thinking about that? So maybe it's a big question, but maybe we start there.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think what you're hearing is spot on. It's what I'm hearing when I'm talking to customers. It's what I'm hearing back from my field team every day, right? Companies are being asked to do more with less. And I think there's a few things that are going on there. Like, one is a lot of companies have gone through pretty tough changes over the last year and a half, whether that's downsizing, in some cases, their teams. In other cases, they're being asked to do more with fewer tools, right? And a lot of that is coming from these, macroeconomic conditions putting a lot more pressure on, especially like growth stage companies.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we look at our data in terms of where the different segments are seeing the most pressure. Enterprise is a little bit more resilient. Startups, actually, surprisingly, startups and SMBs a little bit more resilient, but it's those growth companies that are in that middle tier, few hundred people to a few thousand people, VC funded, but not quite yet to profitability. That's where I think it's felt the most acutely. And so folks are being asked to do more with less. And in parallel, there's actually more to do, right? Smaller recruiting teams, but I don't know if you've heard, there's a ton more inbound.
Absolutely.
Right? And even like getting through all of your inbound every day has become a way bigger pain point than it was like a year or 2 years ago, because the market's shifted. So yeah, spot on. Teams are being asked to do more with less. And a lot of them are thinking, well, how could technology help, right? And I'm sure another theme that was talked about at Transform was AI. Because a lot of people are thinking, they're seeing that, they're feeling actually for the first time, like people can tangibly feel AI because of ChatGPT, right? Everybody's known about AI for a long time, but for the first time, like,
now on the sourcing side, obviously you've built a platform that enables recruitment teams to be more successful. And there's a big debate right now about, is AI going to replace recruiters or supercharge, be a co-pilot for them to, maybe level up and do more, I guess, important work or impactful work rather than just sourcing and sifting through candidates and that kind of, and generating reach outs. What's your take on that? Obviously, you're really close to this. You can probably see how fast technology is moving, how effective it is. And have some kind of vision into the future here, more than most. So what's your take?
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
Yeah, my take is that AI is not going to replace recruiters. I definitely see it as something that can supercharge recruiters, but still really needing the importance of having recruiters in the loop, right? And so that's why all of the AI we build at GEM, we still leave the recruiter in the driver's seat. And there's a few ways that we do that, and we think about that because we think it's really important. One is we think with generative AI, there's actually a new opportunity that's never really been available before to give end users, to give recruiters a lot more input into the AI and the algorithm itself, right? ChatGPT allows for prompting, right? And essentially what you're doing is you're creating this structure around the prompts, the inputs that go into the algorithm.
Yeah.
And what that does is previously AI, before generative AI, it was much more of a black box. You couldn't actually have much control into the inputs into the algorithm. But what prompting allows us to do and allows it enables from like a technology perspective is not just like better AI, it's actually a lot more control over the algorithm and the inputs, and a lot more visibility into what's happening and why. So the two things that I think are really important to enable recruiters and recruiting teams to be co-pilots and to sort of co-create with AI are one, like the right inputs into the AI, and two, the right visibility into why AI is making the decision it is. And that is both important from a trust perspective, but also that can be a feedback cycle into better prompting.
Yeah.
I think that it's very clear that things have dramatically shifted and changed over the past few years, and how we think about ourselves and our roles in TA is changing.
Yep.
So I think it's a really good topic to talk about, and something that you have a lot of experience in working for some of the best technology companies in the world. So I guess I'd like to start from a place of, what is the rationale for thinking about the new TA leader and it changing in the first place?
You know, it's funny. I actually think there's a paradigm shift across the people team in terms of what the new leaders of each of the people team functions need to be and what they need to be thinking about. But more specifically for TA, I think it's about, you know, just what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, right? We went through the Great Resignation, and it was like hire recruiters, and more pumping of bodies in. And then just this last year, in a very sad way, you saw big functions like TA get hit the worst. And I think people within TA functions and leaders of TA functions are coming out of this going, okay, how do we not let this happen again? I also think with organizations rethinking how they want to find talent, and this whole shift to skills-based hiring is putting a new focus on the power of what a TA function can do. So the leader can't be thinking about, you know, butts and seats. They have to be thinking about organizational transformation, change, the use of technology like AI, and really, how do you shift the role of the recruiter and the sourcer so that it's more of a consultative or advisory role, and not a sort of heads down, trying to find resumes, trying to find people just to fill a slate.
Yeah.
So I think it's just the world is actually pushing it, and just what's happened in the last couple of years.
Yeah. It's really true. I think that everyone's, in agreement that those 21, 22 years were pretty insane.
And brutal.
Yeah. And brutal.
Yeah.
And it's no one's fault. If you're a talent leader and your company's asking you, just putting headcount on top of headcount, you need to react in some way.
Yeah.
And I think the only, I guess, weapon that people felt they had was, or the option they had, which is to add more people.
Yes.
And add more headcount to their recruiting function.
Yes.
Because they were just in the midst of it. They were trying to fly the plane whilst building it. And now, retrospectively looking, I mean, people are saying, well, let's not do that again.
No.
Let's be more strategic. Let's think about how, if this happens again, what we can do, how we can build our teams. And I do think there's another thing that you touched upon there, which is there seems to be this real desire for TA leaders to prove their value.
Yes.
And not just be needed when there's tons of hiring to do.
When there's tons of hiring to do, and to, in some respects, demonstrate impact in much more strategic ways. For example, I've been in a lot of organizations where the internal mobility process sits with, the career development team, and it doesn't make sense there because, where it should sit is with the people who are, expert at finding talent. And we need to create this sort of world in which TA has access to information about top talented people within an organization. Why? Not because it's easier to recruit, but the time to market is actually quicker for the business, right? You find someone who's really talented inside the organization who actually is ready for another role, and you make it really, really easy for them to move around within the organization. It's one of the most strategic plays an organization can have. But often, because you have internal mobility over here and TA over here, and TA is just about outward facing, internal mobility is owned by somebody else, you're actually creating a break in process and a struggle that doesn't necessarily need to happen. So I think the talent acquisition function should really be about finding talent, period. Whether it's internal, external, in different markets, and being proactive about bringing that information to the business. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was just like, and I said this before, why can't we start thinking about TA functions like sales organizations?
Yeah.
Think about that. Most sales organizations sell a product. What's the product for TA? The business.
Yeah.
The role, the culture, everything about it. So if we thought about TA that way, it just starts to think, there's a real strategic play that TA functions can have in organizations that isn't just about hiring when it's really, really important to grow and downsizing when it's not.
Creating a talent process that never fails. It's quite a big ask, maybe.
Yes.
But I know a lot of leaders are thinking about how to build the best talent practice, obviously in a very competitive markets, how to think about that. So I wanted to get your take, maybe a bit about your experience of how you think about setting up best-in-class hiring processes.
Certainly. Well, I want to give a quick disclaimer in that I promise to contradict myself throughout our conversation today. So hopefully we're all comfortable with that.
Yeah,
In terms of that ambitious goal, when I think about something that doesn't fail, let's sort of start with that, right? And then we'll kind of work through what does it mean to optimize for certain components of a hiring process. And when I hear those words, doesn't fail, I smile because I know that at times it's going to break down and it will fail.
Yeah.
I don't think you can actually build a bulletproof hiring process that 100% of the time gets 100% of the things right. So then you have to start thinking about what do you want to optimize for? And what are you also trying to eliminate, right? So let's start talking about what are you trying to optimize for? Are you trying to optimize for speed? Are you trying to optimize for quality? Are you trying to optimize for diversity and inclusion?
Yeah.
Are you trying to optimize for candidate experience? There's a very long list of things that you can try to optimize for in your hiring process. And you cannot have it all the time. And so to work with the stakeholders that you have to go through an alignment process and have a set of commitments around what you're optimizing for and what your goals are. So then it becomes, okay, once you have that conversation, how do you also account for things like bias, right? One of the, and what I also like to talk about, if anybody wants to take me up on it and debate it, when I hear people talk about the like false precision, right? I do think that there's this idea of we're going to create a great process and it's excellent all of the time. And we're going to measure the outcomes and we're going to set up structured interviews and we're going to be 100% confident that this is an amazing process and it's going to yield us outstanding outcomes. To me, that is the wrong place to start from. It exudes a high degree of overconfidence, and the more time I spend in my career, the more I recognize when I see that around me, and try to point it out. So I think there's the overconfidence that you can get into, and then the false precision, which is trying to create too much of a scientific process. Measuring is great, structure is great, but let's also start that we are dealing with human beings that are fallible. So let's talk about that. What do you want to try to eliminate in your hiring process from a bias perspective, right? We all do interviewer training. We present on a list of 10 or 15 biases that can creep into the process. Two come to mind immediately, and I've been spending a lot of time with these. One is a concept called idiosyncratic rater bias.
Whoa.
Have you heard that before?
No.
Okay. So this was actually really interesting. About 10 years ago, it kind of hit the market, so to speak. And there's two big studies. And the data it varies a little bit. But essentially what it means is you as an interviewer come into that interview with a lot of baggage, essentially, a lot of past experience, a set of beliefs. And what these two studies proved was that the way you rate a candidate has way more to do about you than the candidate.
And something that I think separates generally the best leaders to average ones is their commerciality. And I think a lot of people look at TA as this very specific vertical and specialism, when actually you're just great TA leaders are great business leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something to be really clear about. So we want to talk today about how you can become a commercial TA leader, and tips about how you think about things commercially and ways people can start acting more commercially and showing up more commercially in their day-to-day. What are ways that they can maybe in their day-to-day roles start being more commercial? Like, how would you advise people to do that?
So I have this kind of concept I talk about in my book, which is that every company is building three products. You have the customer-facing product, or your like kind of public-facing product, and that is like raises if your hires raises, or podcast studios if your podcast studios, whatever it is, right? Office locations if your WeWork. And a lot of your companies spending their time kind of centered on developing and improving that product and the experience of your customers. You also have a fiscal product, like a financial instrument, and that financial instrument exists for your venture capitalists. If you've got VC backing, or as shareholders, they're buying into something, right? You buy shares because it's a product that you're trying to kind of get some kind of benefit out of. And then the final product you're building is this employee experience. And all these three things are symbiotic to each other. If you have an incredible consumer-facing product that's really smashing it, then hopefully you've got better investment opportunities, whether that be, private equities knocking at your door, you've got venture capitalists knocking at your door, just your share value goes up. And then with that capital, hopefully you can deploy it into really high quality talent, very aligned with your mission, pay them more, kind of give them better benefits and opportunities. And the happier and more engaged your employees are, we all know that hopefully the better consumer-facing product you're going to build. It's a very symbiotic relationship between the three of them. And in my opinion, I think the kind of king product is the fiscal product, right? You really want to make your company worth as much as possible, because if that is true and you're getting really high quality investment, then inevitably the rest of the products will succeed and be really valuable. I think there is a reasonable argument that your employee experience is a very strong kind of second to that for a lot of people. But if you have that headspace where you're like, so there's these three products that are really in service of the company's valuation or the share valuation or more investment or runway or whatever you want to see your outcome of the fiscal product being, that automatically puts you in a headspace where you have to understand those codependent relationships between the three of them. Now, I'm not saying everyone in TA needs to go away and become an expert at like board relations, but you do need to understand that the outcome of the work that you are doing and building an incredible employee experience product and having a really high ELTV to CAC payback ratio is that your company is worth more money, right? And I think that headspace and like kind of thinking about it through that lens is already a really good first step to take to become more commercial. So you aren't just a person that providing a service to a company that it needs to like just ostensibly keep running, but you're a person providing a service to a product that is crucial in making your company's valuation as high as possible.
How to think differently about talent brand in a post-pandemic world. I know it's something that you feel really strongly about. But I thought we'd start by getting your take on the shifts that have happened over the last few years in regards to talent brand and what you're seeing out there in terms of trends and things that are just different.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting how the pandemic has had a series of consequences that we didn't foresee at the time, but now in hindsight, it's kind of really obvious that things have been disrupted way beyond what initially happened during the pandemic. And what I mean by that is how it caused an inflection point in how we think about work, how we think about our relationship to companies and how companies think about their relationship to their employees, how we value our time, how we think about where we live, how we commute. It really caused us all to throw all our cards up in the air and then really question how we were living before. Is that the right way to live? And it's obviously spun off multiple conversations about return to work and hybrid and remote, but then beyond that, bigger questions of, does the 5-day work week still make sense? Does working for 40 years without a break still make sense? How are we expected, for most households that are 2-parent households with kids that also need both parents to work, how did we make any of that work? And does that still make sense? And I don't think the dust has fully settled. But the result of all of that is, and I think this is a really good thing, that we're starting to question some of the accepted norms around how we live and how we work. And that then, of course, has had a huge impact on the talent market.
How do you create a team that's suitable for the cycles of recruitment that inevitably are going to happen, right? It's no secret now, and I think that we're going to go through ups and downs. It's going to be volatile. Is there a way that you can create like a solution that can deal with both of those things at the same time?
Yes, there we go. Yes, that's the answer. Yes. I think we need to think about this entirely differently. And what I mean by that is, I think the more progressive talent teams and the more progressive talent leaders have always had a marketing mindset, right? We're a sales function. We're in the, I've long argued that we're the most critical sales function in any organization, because if we can't sell a career, we haven't got a hope of selling anything else, number one. But I think we need to take that. We've been on a journey and we need to take it to its logical conclusion and really rebuild our systems, our processes, and our philosophy from the ground up, from truly a candidate-centric, a customer-centric mindset. So much of our philosophy and processes and enabling technology really was built to enable recruiters to do their jobs. And actually, what we should be thinking about are, who are our customers? Our biggest constituency of customers are, of course, our candidates and our applicants.
And people are very hesitant to spend, to increase headcount on that talent team and to invest because there's a lot of uncertainty happening. So I think it's on people's minds, and people are looking at ways that they can do this effectively. And I know that's something that you have experience with and have a lot of thoughts about. So I thought we could talk about that today.
Okay.
I guess just to start, what's your approach kind of running and like philosophy on running a lean team?
Well, I've only ever worked on lean teams, just the industry that I'm in. So my approach is always looking at the company, what their needs are, which I feel like everybody always starts with, but really going to what's the meat? Like, what do we really, really need? What do I need to focus on so I can help scale myself and get the work done as well. So there's many things that I would look at.
It's really important for you to find super adaptable recruiters
Yes,
who can be thrown into lots of different situations, stakeholders, different types of roles.
correct.
That's pretty hard to find because recruiters like to specialize. They like to be in their own little
They do.
lane. How have you found a successful way of finding those people?
I'm a really big advocate for, like, if you find a really good recruiter, they can recruit for anything, just takes them time to learn. So I try to focus on the area that I need them focused on most. So say like paid media. So I'll go and I'll find a recruiter that understands paid media, how to recruit against programmatic, search roles, etc. And then I'll introduce them and train them on other areas within the company. And you learn that by building out with the hiring leads, like how they define what top talent looks like. Our intake meetings are super helpful. And just having them shadow me, shadow my partner that I have as well. And just learn by doing.
So you pick a recruiter that has like a core skill set of a bulk of roles that you already recruited for and that will be consistently recruiting for, and then cross-train them. And one of the big topics that came up was this confusion around quality of hire. And how the market has really shifted recently. People are maybe hiring less. They're being more intentional with their hiring. They're focusing on efficiency and quality. But there seemed to be a lack of, I guess, people agreeing on what that meant. So I think today we're going to talk about something that I know you're passionate about and have some great ideas about, which is quality of hire. What is quality of hire from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, at the very foundational level, quality of hire is meant to assess the value and the contribution that an employee brings to an organization over the long term, that furthers its long-term success and business goals. So how do we evaluate, the contribution, the value add of every new person that we're bringing into the organization so that we can optimize over time?
And why do you think there is this drive and this importance being placed on this metric? It seems to be everyone's talking about it. No one can agree on it. Why do you think that is right now?
Back in vogue.
Yeah.
I think there's a few reasons for that. I think the main one, and look, quality of hire has been around for a while. I was on Google Scholar, so I was curious, and it was referenced in, academic studies in 1991.
Oh, wow.
So it's been around for a while as a term. And then, since 2010, if you look at like the Google trends, there's sort of like a steady climb. So it hasn't come out of left field. It's been around and people have talked about it for a long time, but it's definitely been, I think it peaked in March on Google Trends. And the reason for that is coming out of, there was this huge boom in hiring, particularly in tech. And then we had a big pullback in that space. And, the pullback was the result of valuation shifting from growth being what was valued highest from a valuations perspective to margin efficiency. So the way companies were valued changed. And so the priorities of those companies changed accordingly. And a lot of leaders looked at the organization and realized that they had to become more efficient to realize valuations and to grow. And, people are a big part of the equation when it comes to efficiency. And so there was a huge focus on one, unfortunately, a bunch of companies cut back pretty substantially so they become more efficient. And, the result of that was each incremental hire thereafter was way more important because you're not going to make quite as many of them. And, I think also a lot of leaders looked at companies that made some pretty substantial changes and cuts and saw that they didn't fall apart. They pulled back and they got leaner and they were still able to execute. And so there was definitely a conversation among leaders of companies about and kind of a drive towards building lean and more efficient teams overall. And that being a better path, not just because it's more efficient, there's less cost, but also potentially it helps with execution, right? There's less complexity. And so a lot of CEOs, a lot of leaders were having conversations internally that, we need to build a lean team. Every hire matters. So are we hiring the best people? How do we know we're hiring the best people? I heard that from, I talked to hundreds of TA leaders every month or two. And I heard that many times in a short period of time, that CEOs were coming to them and saying, how do we know we're hiring the best? And the answer was, we're not sure. And so step one is trying to assess and measure the quality of hire so that, we know, right? We know how we're doing from a effectiveness perspective, and we can optimize over time and make sure we're building these sort of lean, talented teams. So I think that was kind of the long arc of how the conversation sort of spiked back up in the last, year or so.
There's been a lot of talk at the moment around how recruitment's broken. There's been a very famous influencer that came out with that statement and got a bit of heat. So we're here to talk about why it's not broken, but maybe fractured or sprained, perhaps. So I guess let's start by talking about, from your point of view, what are the biggest issues or challenges that are happening in the industry right now that you see?
So those of you that obviously know me, I feel like a knob saying that, but you know what I mean? As in, like, those of you that know me from LinkedIn will know that I spent half a year on the job market. And what I've seen during that 6 months has been quite eye-opening. You obviously use the platform regularly, you hear things, you see things, but it's why it's probably fractured and sprained rather than broken is, someone put a post out the other day, there's lots of roles being posted, not a lot of people getting hired, which is quite ironic. So people are posting about ghosting, lack of feedback. I think the problem is when you have more platforms to basically communicate on and share your thoughts and opinions, it'll amplify it 10 times over, right? People have been encouraged to kind of personal brand more on LinkedIn, have a voice. So probably what you've seen is that it has amplified, more having a voice and sharing their opinions, but also there's more recruiters on the market that, again, use the platform, that are sharing their opinion, sharing their voice. I think where we're probably going wrong is we've lost that human touch. It's not very human-centric anymore. Become very transactional. It's become a case of, if you're good enough, we'll contact you. If not, you may get an email to say, sorry, no thanks. Personal experience, I applied to 175 jobs in 6 months. The tracker that I've got, 87 people came back to me. So literally that's half people. I could be still in play. Might be getting a phone call tomorrow about a job. I don't know, but it's the lack of closure. I think also the lack of emotional intelligence and actual empathy from recruiters is the actual issue right now, is that people, let's face it, as a candidate, I just want closure. I want to be treated fairly in the process, be closed out, get some form of feedback if I enter it into an interview, and that's it. The problem is that people are being left on red. That's the comparison, right? Is just being seen but not engaged with. And then that amplifies too as well when you have people that don't use their intelligence on LinkedIn. So the market right now is quite buoyant for recruiters. You've got a job that's posted on your company website. Don't then go on LinkedIn and say, I'm hiring for a recruiter, because what you're going to do is create this almost like a bum fight of people trying to apply to jobs. You look on LinkedIn now, 100 CVs in an hour to a recruiter job. And of course, you can't deal with the volume. People aren't set up to deal with the volume. And you've had companies that have reduced headcount, and even from senior leaders, myself, peers have been let go because of budgets, with the view to have AI coming in to support those cumbersome tasks. But the irony is that you're cutting budgets and cutting headcounts, but then AI is not cheap.
Yeah.
So you're offsetting the cost of people to implement AI into it. So in a roundabout way right now, it's poorly run, it's human-centric, it's not human-centric, it's transactional, people, and also look, it's the nepotism, the cronyism, the bias, ageism that's currently out there right now. It's rife in there. I've been in processes where I know that someone's got the job because they know somebody. I've been told that I didn't have a certain amount of experience that I was lacking. The person then who was hired didn't have it either. So it's a face fit. It's again, because TA is now the ambassador, it's the branding piece. They want people that can look and sound like the company. Doesn't matter whether you've got 10 years experience, you've hired in this area. If your face doesn't fit, they would hire you. I was told at the last stage that I wasn't being hired because they had to hire a female by the board. And I was like, fine, but don't tell me at last stage, tell me, don't put me through the process. So that's what's kind of happened recently in the market. It's just, and yeah, as we'll talk about later on, it's the kind of hangover too from that 2021 hiring glut of recruiters, where for the first time there was more hires or live roles for recruiters than what there was for developers.
Please don't forget to subscribe and follow for future episodes. Thank you.